Welcome to the Elements of Success podcast with Johnny Dawson. This is the show that will inspire you to uncover your formula for success so you take charge of your story, overcome life's obstacles, and find fulfillment in all branches of life. With Johnny as your guide, you will break down the science of success and experiment with how you can combine key elements to uncover discipline you need to accelerate your journey towards prosperity. Now, on to today's episode.
Welcome to the Elements of Success podcast, where we explore traits that have helped others achieve their success. Our hope is to inspire you to discover your own element of success. Today, we're joined by my co-host, Eric Johnson. How are you today, Eric?
I'm doing great, Johnny. It's a fantastic day. It's getting warmer out there. I've been waiting for this for a while.
Finally, I know Ohio's had what we call our sprinter, which typically rule of thumb is once it snows 3 times in April, we are officially into official spring now. So
Nice.
That has happened, and I think we can move on and not see any more snow this year, which is excellent. I'm very excited for it.
All right. Well, we've had 2 snows in April so far, so maybe we're due for a third. I hope not. But I know we didn't come to talk about the weather. What are we talking about today?
Yeah. So today, I really want to talk about a topic that obviously has seen a lot of headlines. And the topic I want to try to use it as an element of success and demonstrate possibly how we could all be a little bit better with this element of success in general, not only as entrepreneurs, business folks, whatever the case may be, but as a better person, entirely in itself as well. So what we intend to talk about is accountability. And the definition of accountability is the fact or condition of being held accountable, which really translates into responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, before we dive into this topic, though, I want to ask you a question.
All right.
That question is, have you ever blamed someone for something, or has anyone ever blamed you for something?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
So
I kind of figured that was the
Yeah.
answer. Now, either you were right or wrong. I don't care, whichever way it was. But let me ask you this. What was the vibe or the tension of that situation right after you were either blamed or you blamed someone for something?
That's tough. So I've got a kind of a 2-part answer here.
Okay.
When it comes to blaming, I've done it to others, rightfully so sometimes, right? They made a mistake and it's their responsibility. But when I was younger, I know that there were times when I blamed somebody, just to kind of save my own butt, if you will. But as I grew in integrity and honesty, and I realized that that's just not who I want to be, that ended. But being blamed, when I was younger, there were certain feelings that I had being blamed, either by a sibling or a friend or whatever. And it was interesting that I had to figure this out as a business owner as well.
Right.
I had a client issue, and there was a group, and I was blamed for something that it didn't actually fall on me, but the relationship within the company was a little bit tougher, right? And so it brought up all sorts of feelings that I didn't expect, and as a business owner, I was not ready or prepared for. So, I mean, it has affected me in different ways, throughout my life.
Yeah, I agree. And typically I feel like either when you blame someone or someone blames you, there's a sense of tension, right? It's one of those things where immediately both parties become defensive.
Yeah.
And there's really no resolve from that tension. I mean, once the tension is there, it's there. And really the only way to get rid of the tension is proving that the other person was in fact to be blamed, or proving the other person should have been blamed.
Yeah.
That's the only way the tension gets resolved. And then once the tension is resolved, then somebody in the relationship has to decide, you know what, that was my fault. I'm sorry. So there needs to be an apology to bring the relationship back to zero. And I just feel as a society, we've kind of lost a lot of accountability in several different areas of life. Mostly, I think we're quick to blame everyone else rather than trying to provide solutions from a place of peace. And I want to give you an example of this. A lot of our listeners know, and that we have 4 sons. If I kind of scold one of them or blame one of them, and let me tell you, I typically blame the wrong one for the wrong event 9 out of 10 times. But when I blame one of them, their reaction is immediately to become defensive. And it's just nature. Like, wait a minute, I didn't do that. Why are you blaming me, Dad? Titus did that. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
However, I have noticed with them, if I approach them from a calm perspective with a solution, rather than blaming them on how they could have done things differently to avoid being in trouble, that is way better received. And they actually learn a lesson.
Yeah.
And I feel like that we're in this phase of life that blame is being placed in all categories. I mean, there's just blame, and no one's really providing solutions rather than pointing fingers saying it's your fault, you got to fix it. No, it's your fault, you need to fix it. Well, when do we collectively come together and start creating solutions? That is what I want to kind of dive into today with accountability in some form or fashion. And how I want to do this is from my own personal life experience. And we've had some excellent guests on. The next guest after this show is Sean Bailey. And I know what Sean's going to talk about, and he's going to talk about a particular situation where him and I actually got into accountability conversation / argument. So after this, immediately listen to Sean's when it comes out. But the demonstration I want to use here for accountability, and this is my own perspective, my own objective to those listening, think of solutions and how to change your own mindset to create your own element of success of accountability. And here's where I want to set the scene. Scene is 2006, and it was my last combat tour in Iraq. And the war at this point had become pretty political, right? In fact, this is to give you an idea. I received a seatbelt ticket in a combat zone.
So for not
I'll
wearing
let that
your
sink
seatbelt?
in a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking about like a seatbelt in a car.
Yeah. So long story short, we stopped by a base and was going to eat. So I just dropped the guys off at the chow hall, and I told them, you know what, you guys go ahead and start eating. I'll go fuel up the Humvee. Pulled out of the fuel depot with the Humvee, and sure enough, an MP and another Humvee pulled up beside me and tells me to pull over. And I pull over, and he sticks his head in, and he's like, "Hey, Corporal, you're not wearing your seatbelt." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, it's base policy. You got to wear your seatbelt." And I told him to look in the Humvee. And so he looks in, and he's like, "You don't have any seatbelts." And I'm like, we cut him out of the Humvee because I get caught on our gear, man. Like I'm not wearing a seatbelt in Iraq. It's just not going to happen. I'm in a full Kevlar jacket and I'm wearing a Kevlar helmet. I'm not wearing a seatbelt. And he's like, "Well, I got to write you this ticket." And so this is honest truth. He writes me a ticket. I ask him to drive me to wherever the MP location is at. And I go in there and I kind of slap the ticket down on the counter, and it's a second lieutenant that's in behind the counter. And I said, "Listen, sir, I got this ticket. What it says I have a court date to come back and talk to a sergeant major. Like, I'm not going to be here. This is crazy." And I said, "Well, what happens if I don't come back to this date? Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not coming back. I'm not going to be here." And he's like, "Well, your license will be suspended indefinitely while in Iraq." And I'm like, "Wait a minute. You guys have a database where you're going to suspend my license in Iraq?" And he's like, that's what we're doing. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, this is crazy. So this is how political the war had become at this point. Now, accountability in a war is very important. Okay. In fact, the ROEs, which stand for rules of engagement, change very fast. And due to how political the war was, our ROEs almost became as ridiculous as that ticket was. So the first trip that I had in Iraq and going into the Battle of Fallujah in 2004, our ROEs were recon by fire. Now, what does recon by fire mean? That means that if it looks suspicious, sounds suspicious, or smells suspicious, just shoot at it. And if it shoots back, well, now you know it's a threat. So it was basically no questions asked. If you felt threatened, just shoot it. And the country by this time had really gotten tired of kind of some collateral damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're being honest, Marines were never meant to be an occupancy force. That's just not what we were designed to do. We're designed to go in, do what we had to do, and then have other branches come in and occupy the countries. But we were being used to occupy Iraq and Afghanistan. And we just weren't trained very effectively, in my opinion, on how to occupy countries, but we were being told that this is what we needed to do. Our leadership decided that taking a life in Iraq was to be at the last resort, meaning how we accomplished this was the leadership made our rules of engagement extremely difficult. And here was the process. So the last tour that I had in Iraq, I had the honor and the privilege to protect the area of operations colonel in Anabar province. So we would drive around in mounted Humvees and things of that nature, protecting him mostly, transporting him from different areas. But we would do a lot of patrols, backup for QRF is what it's called, for different operations that were happening in the area. Mm-hmm. So this is a Humvee with a 50 cal mounted to it, not only one Humvee, but usually 5, 6, or 7. And the first step, if we felt threatened or if someone started shooting at us, was to wave a fluorescent orange flag in the air. As if the Humvee and the 50 cal wasn't enough, right?
Yeah.
The second step was to shoot a pin flare into the air. So a pin flares, it's basically looks like a pin. You pop the bottom of it and the red flare, green flare comes out the bottom. The third step, if that didn't work to get their attention, was to shoot a dummy grenade in the direction of the threat. Now, a dummy grenade is basically, it just blows up into an orange dust. There is, unless you strike something with it, it is literally not going to do any damage. That was step 3. Now, once you've gone through waving your flag, shooting a flare, shooting a dummy grenade, now you get to shoot a live round. But you can't shoot it at them. You got to shoot it above their location, to the side, whichever way. It's basically the sound of the gun needs to let them know, like, hey, quit messing around. We're being serious. Quit trying to kill us. And if that didn't work and they're still progressing or still doing their thing, then you could shoot the threat. So here you are in the middle of a war, and you have 5 steps that you have to go through before you could literally shoot back at the threat. When we were told this, I remember like it was yesterday when we were told this. We were kind of like, this is a death sentence. Like, there is no way on the planet we can make a decision from that time frame to do all of these things that you want us to do and still survive. There's not going to happen. There's no way. And we did it. We cried about it. We didn't want to do it, but again, you're working directly for the colonel. So you've got pretty close proximity to a lot of leadership. So you better do it. Yeah. And here's why I'm bringing this up is if the Marines can somehow change the way they behave in a war zone and in a country that literally everyone is trying to kill you, and provide a solution to prevent collateral damage, because it was obvious by that time the country was just tired of it. How can we not provide some sort of accountability as a nation in providing solutions rather than blaming each other over every tragedy that we face as a country? Solutions come from a place of calming. They come from a place of peace. They come from a place of caring. Blaming does not come from that place. When you are blaming someone or something, you are not holding anyone accountable. You're not even holding yourself accountable. And when I first started in the business, there was a sentence that I wrote down on a Post-it note. And it was, I am the problem, I am the solution. That no matter what problem I face, whether it was rejection, whether it was feeling defeated, whether it was going out and knocking on 1,000 doors and not getting anybody's interest to hire me as a financial advisor at that time, I had to change my mindset to fix that problem. And internally, I was the solution. The problem with society today is everyone says everyone else is the problem, and everyone says everyone else is the solution. When you pivot and you start to look internally to yourself and you start to say, you know what, maybe it's my mindset that needs a change. Maybe it's It's my feelings towards others that need to change. Maybe I'm the problem, but I am also the solution. When you think about your own life and circumstances and you're holding yourself accountable to your own actions and providing solutions to any situation that may be stressful to you, not just what is happening in our country on a large scale, but what have you been blamed for or blamed others in your own life where a different approach could have been used? That is accountability. That's what I want people to understand is accountability isn't someone else fixing it for you. Accountability is you using your platform, your voice, and who you are to not only hold yourself accountable, but those around you, because you get to control the circle that's around you, whether you realize that or not. You have some say in the circle around you. Eric, let me ask you this. When I just kind of went through that scene of Iraq and accountability, what are, in your mind, what kind of resonates with you as far as accountability in itself as we're trying to share this element of success?
So here's a couple thoughts from what you said and the story that you told. There's a couple things that really stuck out to me. Number one, the quote unquote solution to the problem of engaging too quickly. I believe that came from a place, like you said, of caring, right? They wanted to create a solution, but did they ask the right questions? And I think that when it comes to blame, that's the one thing that's truly, truly missing, is that somebody doesn't go in to ask questions to learn more. They go in immediately to shift blame, put blame on somebody, to say, hey, this is the problem, but they have no way to solve it. They don't come up with a solution because they haven't asked any questions. It's like a company, hiring somebody to come in, and as a consultant, I've done this a lot. If I were to go in and just look around the place and say, okay, you need to change this, and this, without asking the questions of how is the foundation of something built? What are the processes that are being, put in place? Tell me how this operates or this works. Without the knowledge, then there's just no way to have a good solution. And so I think, especially within the media, again, I don't want to blame anybody else, but I believe the media, their job and their purpose is to sell advertising. So when they have a clickbait title, when they say something that's just on the fringes of outrageous, that doesn't truly fit the true narrative, they're doing that to get somebody to watch their show. That's their purpose. Watch that episode, whatever it is. And so we have to also be very aware that we need to ask ourselves those questions. Is this truth? Is this the full story? Is this a skewed story? Is this coming from one side or another? Right.
And maybe that's the key is some sort of solution towards what media can and can't do. Maybe there is a limit on how many articles you can talk about COVID or gun violence or a particular topic. Maybe you have a limit that you can't sponsor ads for one particular agenda. And it's funny because I was just talking to Bora about this week with everything that's, happening in our country, et cetera. I'm like, is there a portal somewhere to where all these media companies are just like, hey, you know what? For the next quarter, all we're going to talk about is gun violence. That's all we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about anything else but gun violence. If you look at last year, what did we talk about? All it was COVID. That's it. That is all that we talked about until now we're over kind of the COVID hump. And now we're going into this higher gun regulation restrictions. And this is the detriment to our country right now. And it's like media creates chaos after chaos after chaos. And you can't just have one media company talking about it, because what's going to happen is other media companies are going to realize, like, wait a minute, they're making a lot of money off these topics. We got to jump on and also talk about that to keep up with everything that's going on. So it is basically a vacuum of just trauma and drama and everything that you can imagine for no reason. I mean, there's reason, but let's do it in a way that creates solutions instead of creating hate and resentment over and over and over and over. Last year, all we did was argue about wearing masks or not wearing masks. If you wear a mask, you're this kind of person. If you don't wear a mask, you're this kind of person. And now, that's gone away. So now we're on to the next topic that divides between the country. Again, it comes back to accountability and solutions. And I kind of want to end on this or this kind of topic here. And it stems from a quote that I recently read, and I absolutely love it. There are two pillars of happiness. One is love, and the other is finding a way of coping with life that does not push love away. This is a quote from a gentleman named George Vaillant. He is a Harvard medical psychiatrist, and he's coined with actually saying this beautiful quote, because this is the first time I've heard it just a couple weeks ago. I've probably read it in a psychologist book at Ohio State at one point, but this is when it really hit me. And the reason why I like this quote is we all have the ability to love. We all control that emotion, but we also have the accountability to push love away or to not push love away. So if you have someone that is unwilling to love, not just themselves or their mindset or whoever, and you have someone that maybe they are blaming others, and that blame is pushing that love away, whether you realize it or not, it is.
Yeah.
And that's what it doesn't create happiness. It creates stress and tension and depression and everything that people live with. And I mean, if you go look on any Facebook group page on the planet and just start going through the comments, that is not love. It's pushing love away, and that's not happiness. So let me ask you this, and I'm talking to the listeners here. What are you coping with in your life, or what are you doing in your life that is not pushing love away? Or a better way to state that, what are you doing to keep love and to keep your mindset focused, to hold yourself accountable of your own emotions, your own thoughts, and providing solutions instead of blaming everyone else around you? Because that blame does nothing but discern your own inside. And I can truthfully speak from that. There's a picture right behind me on this Zoom that we're doing right now, and it's myself and my best friend who was killed in Ramadi in 2004. I blamed a lot of people for his death, a lot. And he was 19, and I truly blamed God. When I say a lot of people, I mean everyone. I blamed the war. I blamed 9/11. I blamed every person in Iraq. I blamed myself. I blamed the president. I blamed anyone associated with why he was in that country. I blamed. And I struggled for a long time with the thought that why would God put 19, 18-year-old kids in a country halfway around the planet just to die, just to be shot at and blown up? I don't have the answer to why, but the one thing that I discovered over a long period of time of having hate and discern in my heart is that I'm in control of the ability to love regardless of the things that have been done to me or done to those that I cared about. You have that same ability. You just haven't realized it yet. And it took me a decade to figure that out. My prayer, my hope is that it doesn't take you that long, that you can come to terms with your own accountability to not just love yourself for who you are, but for everyone around you. Eric, final thoughts.
Beautifully said. I think it was fantastic. I don't have anything to add to that. You're spot on.
Thank you.
You bet. And again, thank you for doing this podcast. I think it's invaluable. And I appreciate you letting me be a small part of it. So thank you so much for that. And of course, our last thank you goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Elements of Success podcast with Johnny Dawson. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Johnny comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening. For everyone at the Elements of Success, this is Eric Johnson inviting you to hold us accountable. What I mean by that is hold us accountable for the content of this podcast. Johnny does a great job of picking the themes and finding guests. And the next guest, as he mentioned, Sean, is going to be fantastic. I'm so excited for that. But give us some feedback. Write in. I know that Johnny would love to hear from you. So please do that. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Elements of Success podcast. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, please click the subscribe button below. If you know anyone who would benefit from listening to this podcast, click the share button.